Nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is an essential constituent of all major organic compounds present in living organisms, that is, amino acids, proteins, enzymes, nucleotides, and nucleic acids. Different processes that occur during nitrogen cycle are nitrogen fixation, nitrogen assimilation, ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification. Nitrogen is picked up as inorganic compound from the atmosphere and is changed into organic form by plants and some prokaryotes. The atmosphere contains 78% of nitrogen in gaseous state, yet animals cannot use it directly. They can use nitrogen either in inorganic forms as ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates, or in organic form as urea, proteins, and nucleic acids. Nitrogen fixation is the conversion of nitrogen into a compound of nitrogen. Thunderstorm, lightning, and rain helps in transfer of large quantity of nitrogen into soil. Biological nitrogen fixation is carried out by symbiotic bacteria, Rhizobium present in the root nodules of leguminous plant like pea. Cyanobacteria like nostoc and Anabaena present also fix nitrogen. Some free-living bacteria like Clostridium also fix nitrogen in soil. Nitrogen assimilation. Plants take up nitrogen and synthesize compounds from it. Other organisms feed on plants to get nitrogen. Ammonification. It involves the decomposition of proteins of dead plants and animals, and nitrogenous wastes like urea, uric acid, etc. of animals to ammonia in the presence of ammonifying bacteria. Nitrification. It involves the oxidation of ammonia to nitrates through nitrites in the presence of nitrifying bacteria, that is, Nitrococcus, Nitrosomonas, etc. Denitrification. Conversion of nitrate to nitrous oxide and then to molecular nitrogen is carried by denitrifying bacteria, Theobacillus. Thus, there is continuous cycling of nitrogen between the atmosphere and living as well as non-living systems.
Hello and thanks for watching. In this video, you will learn about how humans impact the nitrogen cycle, specifically through runoff from agriculture and pollution from septic systems and sewers. You will also learn about the process of eutrophication. Humans have an impact on the nitrogen cycle when we allow nitrogen and other nutrients to enter ecosystems in excess, meaning that there's too much. One way that this happens is through agriculture, or farming, how humans grow food. It is the job of farmers to grow the best food that they can, and as much of it as they can. They want their plants to be healthy, strong, and produce lots of food, so they get help from fertilizer. A fertilizer is a mixture of chemical compounds put into the soil that increases the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium available for plants. Fertilizers are often naturally occurring, such as in animal waste or vegetable compost. However, many fertilizers are made in factories. When farmers use fertilizers, that fertilizer doesn't always stay put. When it rains or when the crops are watered, sometimes those chemical compounds can be carried away in runoff and end up in streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes. Pollution from sewage can also end up in these bodies of water. All of these cause problems. When fertilizer and sewage end up in bodies of water, that leads to there being too many nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. This is called eutrophication, and bodies of water become extremely unhealthy because of this. Too many nutrients, You may be thinking, how could that be a bad thing? Well, let's look at how that could work. Let's say we have a healthy pond. Then some fertilizer ends up getting dumped in it somehow. Fertilizer has lots of nutrients that are good for plants. So what would probably happen is algae would start growing like crazy. The top of the water would just be completely covered in green algae. This is called an algal bloom, and these are not good things. Can you think about what might happen to the plants covering the bottom of the pond that require sunlight in order to grow? Well, the algae is blocking all of the sunlight from reaching the bottom. So all of those plants at the bottom of the pond would die because they cannot photosynthesize and make their food. The algal bloom will also eventually die. All of these dead plants are food for decomposers in the water, like bacteria. As they eat up all of the dead plants, they use up the oxygen that is in the water in order to go through cellular respiration and get the energy from the dead plants. All those decomposers cause the oxygen levels in the water to decrease. If there is so little oxygen in the water, other things that live in the water, like fish, can't survive, and the population numbers would plummet. So, again, this whole process is called eutrophication, when there are excess nutrients in a body of water, and it becomes unbalanced and unhealthy. Usually, it causes algae populations to increase, and then populations of fish in the water to decrease.
Did you know that forests and wildlife are interrelated? I'm sure you do. Forests are home to a variety of wildlife including birds, animals, and even the tiniest microbes. What happens when we cut down trees? Well, we are unhoming the wildlife that is dependent on these forests. What exactly are we snatching away from them? In scientific terms, we are attacking the biosphere. Biosphere is the sphere of the earth in which the living organisms exist and the sphere that supports life. What happens when we attack this very support system? The answer is obvious. We are putting everyone's lives at risk. Whose lives am I talking about? Yes, the innumerable living organisms in the biosphere. They constitute the biodiversity of the environment. What do we mean by the term biodiversity? Biodiversity constitutes the number of living organisms like plants, animals, and even microbes that exist on Earth. These organisms are also interrelated and have a close relationship with the environment. For example, microbes increase the fertility of the soil. The plants depend on soil, sun, and air. Humans depend on plants and animals. Humans also need water and air for survival. Can you see how each one is connected and dependent on the Earth? Well, these diverse life forms in the biosphere constitute the biodiversity of the Earth. Now tell me, do you think that the biodiversity of one region can be different from another? Think about it. Do we find penguins near the equatorial regions? Of course not. Similarly, we will not find trees of the equatorial region surviving near the poles. Thus, we can say that the biodiversity of one region is varied and distinct from that of another. Why do we find such differences? Plants and animals can grow and survive only in specific temperatures and climatic conditions. That is why their habitats are region-specific. How do we protect animals and plants in their habitats? For that, let me introduce you to the concept of protected areas. What exactly are protected areas? Governments of various countries mark certain areas as protected. And which areas are included in this? Those which are rich in biodiversity or even have animals and plants that are threatened. Do you know how many such areas can be marked? There are 3 of them. Sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and national parks are the names of the 3 types of protected areas. What is the difference between them? Why are these areas termed as protected areas? How are they protected? We will answer all these questions in detail in our next video.
Imagine a world without birds, plants, or your favorite animals. This will be a reality if we do not take any measures to stop the loss of biodiversity on Earth. In fact, experts estimate that nearly 50% of species on Earth might be extinct within the next 100 years. So, how can we conserve biodiversity? Conservation of biodiversity can be done in two ways: in situ or on site, and ex situ or off site. Let us understand these two methods in detail. In situ conservation, we conserve and protect the entire ecosystem. In other words, its biodiversity is protected at all levels. For example, to save tigers, we need to save the forests which are home to these vulnerable creatures. Unfortunately, many nations believe that this type of conservation is unrealistic and uneconomical, and so a number of species that need to be saved from extinction outnumber the conservational aid available. To solve this problem on a global scale, conservationists have identified biodiversity hotspots in the world. Initially, there were 25 biodiversity hotspots in the world, which was later increased to 34. Though these 34 biodiversity hotspots cover less than 2% of the Earth's land area, they are inhabited by an extremely large number of species and a high degree of endemism. The term endemism relates to species that are confined to a particular region and not found elsewhere. For example, many species of lemur are endemic to Madagascar Island. Likewise, the lion-tailed macaque is endemic to the Western Ghats of India. Our country too is rich in biodiversity, with 3 biodiversity hotspots, which include the Western Ghats, Himalayas, and Indo-Burma region. Regions with unique ecology and rich biodiversity are legally protected as biosphere reserves, national parks, and sanctuaries. As of today, we have 14 biosphere reserves, 90 national parks, and 448 wildlife sanctuaries in our country. Moreover, Indian religious beliefs and cultural traditions have always emphasized protection of nature. For example, animals such as the elephant and cow, and trees such as peepal and banyan are prohibited from being killed, as people think gods and goddesses reside in them. Moreover, in many cultures, trees and wildlife within tracts of forests called sacred groves were respected and protected. Such sacred groves are found in the Khasi and Jaintia hills in Meghalaya, Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghats of Maharashtra and Karnataka, and the Sarguja and Bastar areas of Chhattisgarh. The sacred groves in Meghalaya provide protection to a large number of rare and threatened plants. In this way, we can provide in situ conservation to many plants and animals in their natural habitat. However, at times, endangered plants and animals need to be taken away from their natural habitat and placed in a special care center. This method of conservation is known as ex situ conservation. Wildlife safari parks, zoological parks, botanical gardens, and seed and gene banks serve this purpose. In fact, many animals are threatened or extinct in the wild, but they continue to live safely in zoological parks. For instance, in India, the population of the one-horned rhino drastically decreased due to destruction of their natural habitat and uncontrolled poaching of its horn. But now it has been specially taken care of in the Kaziranga National Park. In the last couple of years, several advancements were made in ex situ conservation. Now, plants are propagated using tissue culture methods, and gametes of threatened species are preserved in viable and fertile condition using cryopreservation techniques. In addition, seed banks are used to preserve seeds of different genetic strains of commercially important plants for a long time. Ex situ and in situ conservation are thus used to protect and preserve our rich biodiversity. As biological wealth is not confined to political boundaries, its conservation is the collective responsibility of all nations. In 1992, the Convention on Biological Diversity, also known as the Earth Summit, was held in Rio de Janeiro, in which all nations were asked to take appropriate measures to conserve biodiversity and sustainably utilize its benefits. In a follow-up, the World Summit on Sustainable Development was held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa. At this summit, 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local levels by 2010. Ways to conserve our biodiversity are endless, but it is important that we take earnest measures towards its protection and preservation before it's too late.